My name is Colleen Anderson, and I was 34 years old on the day I buried the only person who had ever truly been my parent. His name was Walter Kessler. He wasn't just my grandfather. He was the man who taught me that character matters more than comfort. He taught me how to build a bookshelf, balance a checkbook, keep my promises, and most importantly, show up for the people you love. On the morning of his funeral, I reserved 2 seats in the very front row. Those seats were for my parents, the son and daughter who should have been there to say goodbye. They never came. Instead, 3 hours later, they posted something online that shattered what little remained of my faith in family. And then, just when I thought my heart couldn't break any further, I received a text message from my dead grandfather's phone. That single message uncovered a betrayal so calculated, so heartbreaking, that it would destroy my family forever. This isn't just a story about stolen money. It's a story about loyalty, about betrayal, and about the incredible difference between people who claim to love you and the people who actually prove it. If you've ever learned that your real family isn't always the one you're born into, then you'll understand exactly why the story still keeps me awake at night. My parents, Roy and Denise Anderson, walked away when I was only 7 years old. There was no dramatic goodbye, no explanation. One day they were simply gone. Apparently, they had better places to be than raising a little girl. While other children waited for their mothers after school, I waited for people who never came. Birthdays passed. School concerts came and went. Report cards filled with us earned nothing more than silence. Every year I kept believing maybe, just maybe, this time they'd remember. Most years they didn't, and the few times they did, it was usually a card mailed weeks late with nothing more than a signature at the bottom. No phone call, no hug, no love. But while my parents disappeared, one man stepped forward without hesitation. Walter. He was only 51 years old when he suddenly became responsible for raising a frightened little girl. He never complained, never asked why, never treated me like a burden. He simply cleaned out the spare bedroom, bought me a tiny moon-shaped nightlight because I was afraid of the dark, and quietly told me, "You're home now, sweetheart." Those 4 words changed my life. Walter wasn't wealthy. He had spent nearly 40 years working as a carpenter. His hands were rough from decades of building homes for other families. But every splinter in those hands represented an honest day's work. And every dollar he earned was earned with integrity. He came to every single moment that mattered. Every school play, even the one where I completely forgot my lines and stood frozen on stage. Afterward, he hugged me and whispered, "The audience forgot 5 minutes after you did. You'll remember forever. So let's make sure you remember that you were brave enough to get back up." Every softball game, even when I struck out 3 times in a row. Every parent-teacher conference, sitting in those tiny classroom chairs clearly built for children. His knees practically touched his chin, but he sat through every meeting taking notes on the back of old receipts because he wanted to remember every suggestion my teachers. When I was 9 years old, I finally asked the question I'd been carrying inside me for years. "Grandpa, why don't Mom and Dad love me?" He didn't answer immediately. He quietly placed his coffee cup on the table, looked me straight in the eyes, and spoke words that would guide the rest of my life. "Sweetheart, showing up is the whole thing. Love isn't something people say. Love is the person sitting in the chair. Everything else is just noise." At 9 years old, I didn't fully understand what he meant. At 34, standing beside his casket, I finally did. Because for 27 years, Walter never missed a single chair. Not one. When I graduated college, he was there. When I married my husband Sam, Walter walked me down the aisle. When my daughter Nora was born, he held her in his arms before anyone else and cried with a smile so wide, it filled the hospital room. He wasn't my grandfather. He was my father in every way that actually mattered. Then cancer came. Aggressive pancreatic cancer. The kind doctors don't negotiate with. Within months, the strongest man I'd ever known became painfully thin. His once powerful hands began trembling. Walking across the kitchen became exhausting. Still, every evening after work, I drove 20 minutes to his little house. I'd make him toast he could barely finish. We'd watch old Western movies he'd already seen dozens of times. Sometimes we'd barely speak. We didn't have to. Love doesn't always need conversation. Sometimes it just needs someone sitting in the chair. That's when my mother suddenly reappeared. After years of almost complete silence, Denise flew in from Florida claiming she wanted to help Daddy. At first, I wanted to believe her. Maybe losing her father had finally changed something. Maybe people really could become better. But within days, she had taken control of everything. His mail, his medication, his finances, his bank accounts. When I offered to organize his bills, it was literally my profession as an accountant. She smiled politely, a cold, practiced smile. Then she said, "Daddy wants his privacy, Colleen." Something about that answer didn't feel right. I asked if I could simply monitor the accounts for suspicious activity. Again, she refused. When I called the bank myself, they told me someone else now held power of attorney. That person was my mother. A wall had suddenly been built around Walter, and I couldn't legally climb over it. For weeks I questioned myself. Was I imagining things? Was grief making me suspicious? I kept telling myself, she's still his daughter. Maybe she really is helping him. So I stayed quiet. I focused on taking care of Walter instead. Looking back now, that silence became the biggest regret of my life. Because while I believed I was respecting his wishes, someone else was quietly rewriting the ending of his life. 3 weeks later, Walter was gone. He passed away quietly on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting beside his bed, holding the same rough hand that had held mine for 27 years. A hospice nurse named Grace stood on the other side of the bed, silently wiping away tears. There were no dramatic final speech, no movie-worthy goodbye. Just one last squeeze of my hand, one slow breath, and then complete silence. For a long moment, I couldn't move. It felt impossible that the strongest man I'd ever known had simply stopped breathing. The house suddenly felt enormous, too quiet, too empty, and for the first time since I was 7 years old, I felt completely alone. While I was trying to process the biggest loss of my life, my mother was already gone. She had flown back to Florida 4 days earlier. Her exact words still echo in my mind. I can't just sit around waiting, as if spending a few final days with her dying father was some kind of inconvenience. She promised she'd return for the funeral. She never did. Instead, the responsibility fell entirely on me. I planned everything alone. I met with the pastor, picked every hymn, wrote Walter's obituary at my kitchen table at nearly 2 in the morning while my husband Sam slept beside me. I chose the flowers, called relatives, met with the funeral director, signed paperwork I never imagined I'd have to sign. Every decision hurt. Every signature made his death feel more real. Still, I kept hearing Walter's voice inside my head. Showing up is the whole thing, sweetheart. So I showed up for him, the way he had always shown up for me. When I finally called my mother to tell her the date and time of the funeral, she barely sounded interested. I could hear laughter behind her, pool water splashing, vacation music playing in the background. Then she casually said, "Flights are really expensive this week. Daddy would understand. We'll say a prayer from here." That was it. No apology, no sadness, just another excuse. I slowly lowered the phone and stared at the wall. Walter had driven hours to attend my school plays. He had sat in tiny classroom chairs. He had never once missed a birthday. And now, his own daughter couldn't be bothered to board an airplane for the man who had raised her. Something inside me went quiet. Not angry, not even shocked anymore. Just quiet. As though my heart had finally grown too tired to expect better. The funeral arrived on a cold grey Saturday morning. The kind of morning where the clouds can't decide whether to rain. I arrived early, before anyone else. Without thinking, I walked to the front row and placed 2 funeral programs on 2 empty chairs. One for my mother, one for my father. Deep down, some foolish little part of me still believed they'd walk through those doors. Hope can survive long after common sense dies. People slowly filled the chapel. Neighbors, friends, former co-workers, families Walter had helped over the years. One elderly man cried as he told me Walter had rebuilt his porch after a flood and refused to accept a single dollar. Another woman hugged me and whispered, "Your grandfather taught my husband everything he knew." Half the town came, people whose lives had been touched by Walter's kindness. The room overflowed with gratitude. Only 2 people were missing, his own children. Those 2 chairs remained painfully empty, almost mocking me. The pastor began speaking. Grace gently squeezed my shoulder. When it came time for me to deliver Walter's eulogy, I somehow found the strength. My voice trembled, but it never broke, because Walter had taught me resilience. He had spent 27 years preparing me for difficult days like this. I wasn't going to let him down now. I had barely returned to my seat when my phone vibrated inside my black coat pocket. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something told me to look. I quietly slipped it from my pocket. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. It was a Facebook notification. My mother's newest post. I tapped it open, and suddenly, the entire room disappeared. There she was, standing on a bright Caribbean beach, wearing a turquoise cover-up, holding a tropical drink with a tiny umbrella. Behind her, my father stood smiling at the camera. Golden sunshine, crystal blue ocean, perfect white sand. They looked happier than I'd ever seen them. Underneath the photo, my mother had written only 4 words. "Living our best life." I stared at those words, again, and again, and again. The timestamp hit me like a punch. Posted, 11 minutes after Walter's funeral had begun. While I was standing at his casket, while the town was singing his favorite hymn, while his granddaughter was saying goodbye. His own children were posing for vacation photos. That wasn't forgetting. That wasn't poor timing. That was a choice. A deliberate, heartless choice. My fingers went numb around my phone. For the first time in years, I wanted to scream. Instead, I stayed silent, because that's what grief does. Sometimes it steals even your anger. The service ended. People hugged me, offered condolences, told stories about Walter. I smiled politely, thanked everyone. But honestly, I remember almost none of it. The only thing I could see was that beach photo. I sat alone in my car afterward, engine off, hands frozen on the steering wheel. I kept reopening the post, trying to convince myself I'd misunderstood it. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe Facebook had posted it late. Maybe anything. But every detail confirmed the truth. The timestamp, the comments, the location. She had chosen the perfect filter, the perfect caption, the perfect vacation memory. At the exact moment her father was being buried. That realization, bro, then, just as I was about to drive away, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a Facebook notification. It was a text message from one contact, one name, Grandpa. My entire body froze. My breathing stopped. I stared at the screen. It couldn't be possible. I had held his hand when he died. I'd watched the funeral director close his casket. I had just buried him. Yet somehow, his phone had sent me a message. My hands began shaking as I opened it. There was only one sentence. "Sweetheart, come to my house right now." I read it once, twice, 5 times. The words never changed. Every logical explanation raced through my mind. A phone glitch. A wrong number. Someone playing a cruel joke. But none of them felt right, because Walter would have called me exactly that. Sweetheart. The same word he'd used my entire life. I looked back toward the cemetery one last time, then back down at the glowing screen. Something deep inside me whispered, "Go." Without thinking another second, I started the engine and drove toward my grandfather's house, completely unaware that everything I believed about my family was about to change forever. The drive to Walter's house usually took 20 minutes. That afternoon, I made it in 15. I don't remember a single traffic light. I don't remember passing the old gas station or the grocery store where Walter used to buy peppermints for Nora. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. The only thing echoing inside my mind was that impossible message. "Sweetheart, come to my house right now." How? Who sent it? Why now? The questions chased each other through my head until I turned onto the familiar gravel road leading to Walter's home. The little white house stood exactly as I'd left it only days before. The porch light was on. That immediately caught my attention. Walter always left that light burning whenever he expected me. As a little girl, seeing that warm yellow glow always meant one thing. Someone was waiting for me. My heart started pounding. The front door stood slightly open. I slowly climbed the porch steps we had painted together when I was 12 years old. Every brushstroke suddenly felt like a memory. Every creak of the wooden floor reminded me of him. For a brief second, I almost expected Walter to walk into the hallway wearing his old flannel shirt, smiling the way he always did. Instead, I pushed open the door and froze. Sitting quietly at the kitchen table was an older man wearing reading glasses. In his hand, he was holding Walter's cell phone, the very phone that had just texted me. He slowly stood as I entered. His eyes were filled with sympathy. "Colleen," he said softly, "I'm so sorry." I immediately recognized him. Harold Metz, Walter's attorney, his closest friend for more than 30 years. Before I could ask a single question, Harold gently placed Walter's phone on the kitchen table. "I know this must have frightened you," he said, "but your grandfather insisted this was the only way you'd come immediately." I stared at him in complete confusion. "What do you mean?" Harold took a slow breath. "Months ago, Walter made me promise something. He told me that after he was gone, I had to get you here, no matter what." He looked me straight in the eye and said, "If I call her from my own number, she'll think it can wait. But if my phone sends the message, she'll come immediately." Harold smiled sadly. "He knew you better than anyone." Tears filled my eyes. Even after death, Walter was still finding ways to protect me, still guiding me, still showing up. Harold reached beneath the table and carefully lifted an old wooden cigar box. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't decorative. It was the same box Walter had always used to store screws, nails, and old receipts from his carpentry jobs. Across the lid, written in Walter's shaky handwriting, were 2 simple words: "For Colleen." My breathing became uneven. Harold gently slid the box toward me. "He wanted you to have this. And only you." My hands trembled as I slowly opened the lid. Inside, there were only 3 items: a worn blue journal, a thick stack of bank statements held together with paper clips, and a legal folder. At first glance, none of it looked important, but something about Walter's careful organization made my stomach tighten. Harold quietly pointed toward the folder. "Look at that first." I opened it. Within seconds, my heart sank. The title across the top read "Durable Power of Attorney." I scanned the page, then stopped. My mother's signature, Denise Anderson, the legal authority over every financial decision Walter had made during the final months of his life. I slowly looked back up at Harold. He nodded. "There are things Walter wanted you to know. He didn't trust Denise. Not anymore." The room suddenly felt colder. "What are you talking about?" Harold folded his hands. "Your grandfather began noticing money disappearing from his accounts. He questioned it. But because Denise held power of attorney, she controlled everything. He couldn't stop her." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "No, there has to be some mistake." Harold gently shook his head. "I wish there was." He knew something wasn't right. And because he knew you were an accountant, He started documenting everything. He looked directly into my eyes. He believed you were the only person capable of uncovering the truth. I slowly reached for the blue journal. Its corners were worn. Several pages were bent. Walter's handwriting covered every page. The first entries looked ordinary: doctor appointments, medication schedules, how tired he felt after chemotherapy, little notes reminding himself to water the tomatoes. Then, the tone suddenly changed. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Money seems tight. I don't know why. I frowned. Walter had always been incredibly careful with money. He tracked every dollar, every receipt, every bill. He never forgot where a penny went. Yet only a few pages later, I found another entry. Denise says I spent it. Maybe I did. I'm getting forgetful. I stopped reading. Something felt terribly wrong. Walter wasn't forgetful. He wasn't careless. He was one of the most financially organized people I'd ever known. The journal continued. $400 missing. Didn't buy anything. $600 gone. Grace drove me to the pharmacy. Medicine only cost $40. Where did the rest go? Every page became more heartbreaking. Walter wasn't confused. He was trying to understand why his own savings were disappearing. Then, near the middle of the journal, I found the sentence that completely changed everything. Written so hard, the pen had almost torn through the paper. She thinks I'm too sick to count. I'm not. I just can't stop her. I felt chills race down my arms. He knew. Walter had known someone was stealing from him, and he knew exactly who it was. My own mother. Harold quietly placed the stack of bank statements beside me. Those are copies Walter made him. He asked me to keep them safe. He said someday, Colleen will know what to do with numbers. I slowly spread the statements across the kitchen table. Months of financial records. Every withdrawal. Every transfer. Every balance. My accountant's instincts immediately took over. For the first time since Walter died, my grief stepped aside. Professional instinct replaced it. I grabbed a notepad, started organizing dates, amounts, account numbers, transfer history. Within minutes, a pattern began appearing. The same account. Again, and again, and again. Thousands of dollars leaving Walter's savings. Not for hospitals, not for medication, not for home care. The money was being transferred somewhere else. The destination account ended with the same 4 digits, every single time. I looked at Harold. Do you know whose account this is? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he quietly slid one final document across the table. I looked down. My blood ran cold. The account belonged to one person, Denise Anderson, my mother. I leaned back in the chair, completely speechless. The woman who couldn't afford a plane ticket to her father's funeral had somehow been receiving thousands of dollars from his bank account while he was dying. At that exact moment, I realized something terrifying. The beach vacation, the expensive drinks, the smiling photographs, none of it had been paid for with their own money. It had been financed by the dying man they abandoned. And that was only the beginning. Because once I started following the numbers, I was about to uncover a betrayal worth nearly $500,000. The woman who raised me had left me nothing. But the man who truly loved me had left me something far more valuable than an inheritance. He left me the truth. And I was determined to make sure the world heard it. The next morning, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. And I didn't call my mother. Instead, I did exactly what Walter had trusted me. I followed the numbers. For the next 3 days, my dining room became an investigation room. Bank statements covered the table, receipts, transfer records, Walter's handwritten journal, my laptop, coffee cups that had long gone cold. Hour after hour, I compared every transaction, every withdrawal, every transfer, every signature. As an accountant, I'd spent years uncovering financial mistakes. But this wasn't a mistake. It was systematic, carefully planned, and absolutely ruthless. Starting only weeks after Denise became Walter's power of attorney, money began disappearing from his accounts almost every month. $3,000, $6,000, $11,000, $15,000. The transfers became larger as Walter became weaker. While he struggled to pay medical bills, someone else was quietly draining the life savings he had spent 40 years earning. Then, I found the final account. A certificate of deposit Walter had built over decades. The money he once told me he hoped would someday help someone after he was gone. My hands froze as I read the transaction history. The account had been closed early, the penalty had been paid, and every dollar had been transferred to Denise. I entered the final numbers into my spreadsheet. The total appeared at the bottom of the screen. $465,000. I stared at it, then checked it again and again. The number never changed. Nearly $500,000, stolen from a dying man who still wore the same old flannel shirt because he believed nothing should ever be wasted. In that moment, my grief transformed into purpose. This wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. I called my mother one last time, not to argue, not to accuse, To give her one opportunity to explain, she answered cheerfully. I calmly asked about the transfers. Silence. Then her voice turned cold. That's none of your business. I reminded her that I had Walter's records. She laughed. You weren't his real daughter. You were just the child he felt sorry for. I'm his blood. Everything he had belonged to me. Before I could answer, she hung up. I looked at the phone for several seconds, then quietly placed it on the table. For the first time in my life, I realized I no longer needed anything from her. Not an apology, not approval, not even love. The next call I made was to Harold. Within 2 days, he introduced me to Patricia Ruiz, an attorney who specialized in elder financial abuse. She spent nearly an hour reading Walter's journal and examining every financial record. Finally, she removed her glasses. Colleen, I've handled these cases for 30 years. Most families have suspicions. You have evidence. She tapped Walter's journal. Your grandfather documented everything. She pointed toward my spreadsheet. And you proved it. She explained exactly what would happen if we filed the case. A court-ordered accounting, a financial investigation, potential criminal charges, and possibly prison. Then she asked one question. Are you prepared to take your own mother to court? The room became silent. I thought about Walter, the empty chairs, the beach photograph, the blue journal. Then I remembered the words that had guided my entire life. Showing up is the whole thing. Walter had shown up for me every single day. Now, it was my turn to show up for him. I looked Patricia in the eyes. File it? The legal process moved quickly. My mother was ordered to explain every transfer. She couldn't. There were no receipts, no invoices, no written agreements, only excuses. Then came the courtroom. For the first time in months, I saw Denise face to face. She wore an expensive cream-colored suit, pearls, perfect makeup. She smiled confidently, as though she believed she could charm her way out of mathematics. Her attorney argued that everything had been a misunderstanding, that she had merely been helping her elderly father. Then Patricia stood. One by one, she introduced Walter's journal into evidence. Every handwritten entry, every missing dollar, every transfer, every bank statement, every page confirmed the next. The courtroom became completely silent. Then, something unexpected happened. My mother lost control. She suddenly stood up and shouted, "It was my money. I earned it. I deserved it." The moment those words left her mouth, even her own attorney closed his eyes, because she had just confessed. The judge didn't need long. He ruled that Denise had abused her position as power of attorney. He ordered every stolen dollar returned, then doubled the damages because of intentional financial exploitation. Finally, he referred the case for criminal prosecution. The woman who couldn't find time to attend her father's funeral was now facing felony charges for stealing from him while he was dying. I didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate. Justice rarely feels like victory. Sometimes, it simply feels like the truth finally catching up. Several months later, Denise accepted a plea agreement. She served prison time. My father testified against her to reduce his own punishment. Some relatives stopped speaking to me forever. Others quietly apologized. But none of that mattered anymore, because peace no longer depended on their approval. It depended on my integrity. When the restitution money finally arrived, people assumed I had become wealthy. They were wrong. I kept none of it. Every dollar Walter recovered was donated. We created the Walter Kessler Foundation, helping elderly people who had no family willing to stand beside them. The fund paid for transportation to chemotherapy, home care, groceries, medical equipment. And sometimes, it simply paid for someone to sit beside an elderly person who had nobody else. Because Walter had taught me, sometimes the greatest gift isn't money, it's presence. His house, the little white house with the porch light, was donated to an elder care charity, a place where lonely people could finally find safety. Exactly as Walter would have wanted. Months later, I returned one final time. Sam stood beside me. Our daughter Nora ran across the front yard laughing. Before we left, I walked onto the porch, reached toward the light switch, and turned the porch light back on. Walter had left that light burning for me every time I came home. Now, someone else would see that light. Someone else would know. They weren't alone. I smiled through tears. For the first time since his funeral, the pain didn't feel so heavy. Because grief changes. Love doesn't. Before leaving, I opened Walter's blue journal one last time. On the final page, I read the last sentence he ever wrote. If you're reading this, sweetheart, then I was right about them. And I'm sorry. I gently closed the journal. No, Grandpa, you have nothing to be sorry for. You showed up. You always did. And because you did, I learned how. Today, whenever someone asks me what family really means, I don't think about blood. I don't think about names. I don't think about inheritance. I think about one exhausted carpenter, sitting in a tiny classroom chair, cheering for a frightened little girl who believed no one wanted her, because he taught me the greatest truth I'll ever know. Love isn't found in promises. Love isn't found in words. Love is the person who shows up, even when they don't have to. And that's why, even now, whenever I pass that old porch light glowing in the evening, I smile. Because somewhere, Walter is still keeping his promise. still showing up. If this story touched your heart, remember this. Don't wait until the chairs are empty to tell someone how much they mean to you. If there's someone in your life who has always shown up for you, call them today. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more unforgettable stories of courage, family, and justice.